Okay. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Yeah, feel free to talk. We are a small and intimate group today, which is just fine because we can be a little more conversational that way. I do want to welcome you to Oklahoma City University and Angie Smith Chapel here on the campus, and welcome the Very Reverend Dean Willis for all the way from England here in Oklahoma City. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I do want to welcome all those who are tuning in online. We do have a very present online community. If you don't know, the Dean has cultivated a very significant online presence. So not only people from Oklahoma are tuning in, but people from around the globe are tuning in as fans of the Garden Congregation that was started during the pandemic.
Indeed, yeah. I ought to introduce also my partner, Fletcher Banner, who was the inspiration for going into the garden in the first place, and then learning to use a camera, and over the years becoming quite expert at this. So Fletcher, stand up, and then people will know what.
I do want to say that navigating AV during the pandemic was every minister's journey, and good on you for navigating that. I do have a 2-page single-space bio for you, and I was going to read it, but now I'm thinking I'd just rather talk.
Yes, I don't think that that's terribly relevant. That tells you, what I had for breakfast in 1976 or...
But 2 pages, single space, you have done a lot, and the biggest being at the helm of the mother church of all of English-speaking Christianity, Anglican, the Canterbury Cathedral. Can you just start off by talking about what an incredible life experience it must have been to be in that role?
Okay, yes. Let's also start by saying why we're here.
Oh, please.
It's because the United States is a very big place. So, why Oklahoma at this point? And this all started when Fletcher and I, were part of a team leading a training session in ministry for 55 rectors of the Episcopal Church at Yale. This was last July. And it was called The Leader's Way, this course, and it was some in-service training, and we got to know them well, but a whole week. And one of them was Father Joseph from St Augustine's Church, St Augustine of Canterbury's church here. He's standing at the back. And at the end of the course, I think it was the last lunch, Joseph, you came up and tapped my shoulder and said, we are celebrating a significant anniversary, the 40th anniversary of the Church of St Augustine of Canterbury. It would mean everything to us if someone from Canterbury could be there. So could you come? And at the time, Fletcher and I said, well, we can't answer that yet because that's a long way on from last July to now, and we were planning this year, but it did work out. And so we made the journey to Oklahoma, the linchpin of what we're doing, but we came into Houston first and spent last week in Houston, and then came up through Tyler, where we have a connection, and then that was at the First Presbyterian Church in Tyler, where one of our former organ scholars at Canterbury Cathedral is now the organist, and Weston Jennings actually was our host there together with the minister of the First Presbyterian, but it became a very ecumenical event, and the assistant bishop of Texas was there for part of that as well. So came on from there to here, and we're here for a whole week. So we will get the flavor of Oklahoma in a good way, we feel, in that way. And we've just spent an hour with the bishop here, and he massively approved of the program that Joseph has drawn up for us in terms of its diversity as we go around, and where we can make moves of encouragement to smaller congregations, but also in dimensions of very important conversations like this, we can give an insight from a different perspective from just the local one. So
Absolutely.
Does that help a bit?
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Father, I'll say, I want to give you a shout out for the camera, for everybody, for making this happen. I am the executive director of the Oklahoma Faith Network, and we are a multi-faith, community-based organization that brings together multiple denominations, organizations, and interfaith groups who come together for the movement of faith here in the state of Oklahoma. One of our largest campaigns is called No Hate in the Heartland. And we want to welcome you to the Heartland. It sounds like you've been in Texas, which is
indeed.
also
we have been in Texas, certainly. And we're very aware, and always have been since these events happened, of the very special dimension of our conversation today in extremism, in really all faiths. Somewhere you find this, which suddenly closes the door on any kind of dialogue or understanding. I think that Canterbury Cathedral is seen as, and really is, the mother church of all English-speaking Christians, because Augustine brought the gospel to the English, and the gospels he brought still exist, and they are very attractive. And are brought under solemn guard for us to make our oaths on. The archbishop and the dean, when they are put in, you make your oath of faithfulness on these gospels. But they even have a little strip cartoon there, and they date from, they've been carbon tested, and they date from Tuscany in the mid 6th century. So they are the gospels that Augustine brought.
Wow.
And Augustine, a little bit shy, and stopped at Arles and sort of thought, can we go on? And it was Pope Gregory the Great who thought, well, the one thing that will take him there is to give him a gift to take to King Ethelbert. And so he took the gospels from his library, and Augustine then came bearing a gift. If you've a purpose, there's more of a dimension. And he and his 40 monks were just getting a bit nervous of the wild British on the other side of the channel, coming from the civilized French who were already Christian. So all of that started then. But I wanted just to talk about 2 events that happened in our time in Canterbury Cathedral, which were very much, you might call, interfaith. And one of them was following the early death of one of our ex-choristers. And we have a habit of bringing, if that is what the family wants, bringing the coffin into the crypt of the cathedral just to be there. And this made an enormous amount more sense because of his connection with us in music. And so it happened that the young man's body was lying there, and his parents were in the crypt. The funeral was to be, I think, the next day. And a group of Sikhs came into the crypt. We had a temple of the Sikhs nearby, and I'd even been there to plant a tree in the Sikh temple. And when you go into one, there's not just that, but like a Benedictine monastery, there's the refectory and there's the library and all these things. There's a massive coming together, a fusion of things, which we found exactly the same in the pagodas of China when we were spending a month there back in November, December last year. But the Sikhs asked whether they could say some prayers around the coffin of the young man. And so we looked at the parents, and they were thrilled that this was going to happen. And this was nobody asked questions about doctrine or faiths or details. It was just a spiritual dimension from the Sikhs uniting with the spiritual dimension of the parents, and even the music and rhythm that the young man had known in Canterbury life, because the choristers are absolutely at the heart of all of that. So that's one little camera shot of the life. The other one was on, we called the Sunday after Easter Low Sunday, because generally people after Easter Day, all our regular musicians and everyone else take a holiday, and that hence the term Low Sunday. But they were never low Sundays in Canterbury because a visiting choir would come and sing. And the person who came to play the organ was an old organist of mine, great friends, and he was sitting down playing the organ. At that time, we were restoring the organ, so he was sitting down here. And it was the Sunday after there had been a shooting of Christians in New Zealand.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
And it was a terrible thing that happened on that Easter day. And it was an extremist Islamic attack on Christians there. And we came to the sermon, and while the sermon was being preached in the pulpit, I was sitting in the middle seat celebrating the Eucharist, but at rest at that point, because I was just listening to the sermon with the deacon and subdeacon on either side of me. And a verger, that's one of the sort of folk who look after the running of the service, stepped in just quietly and tapped my shoulder. And he passed me a note which said, "The imam is outside and is wanting, with a group of his people, to lay flowers here in the cathedral somewhere as a mark of both sorrow and standing beside you at this time when Christians have been killed in New Zealand." And the imam was quite a young man, and he had brought a group with him, very shyly. I knew him, but this was completely unexpected. And we were coming towards the giving of the peace in the middle of the service. So I thought, right, let's do this properly. And I knew that it would get a good response. But so we went through the next little bit of the service till we came to the peace. Then I asked the people to remain seated. And I explained that the imam was outside and he had a group of his people with him and they wanted to lay flowers quietly somewhere. But I was going to ask him to come and lay flowers on the high altar step as the communion went on. And I said, when they come in, I know that you will give them the warmest welcome. And they stood, and there was the most huge ovation from the people sitting there as the young imam and this little group came in with the flowers. And he came up and we embraced on the altar steps. And he said, "Dean Robert, I never expected this. I feel a bit shy up here." But I said, this is how it should be. So lay your flowers here. Would you like to speak to the people? And so he said, "May I?" And then I stood back from the microphone, and he spoke in terms of, this Canterbury of ours is a wonderful place, but any kind of world activity which somehow seems to militate against that living peacefully together is something which all of us need to be combating. And this is a place where people ought to be able to come and feel safe, just as the church in New Zealand had been. And we have come to express our sorrow and at the same time to hold an act of unity with you. And then there was another massive ovation, and we embraced on the steps, and I responded, and then they quietly went their way. But those two incidents of the Sikhs and the imam stand out in my mind because they felt wonderful, but they also felt perfectly natural according to what you might call the essence of what we both were. And I think that's what we're here doing today for this place, which has suffered so much from violence. And I think we'll witness some of that as we go around. We can talk in a bit more about the garden congregation and all of that. But for the moment, that was part of being what we would call the steward of the mother church of all English-speaking Christians. Does that help?
Goosebumps,
Right.
which it means I have chills from
yeah.
that story.
Yeah.
Truly, I feel like we are at our most holy when we are connecting across that which tries to divide us.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
There's no setting aside of any of the insights that we have in both faiths, nor the faithfulness we have in that way. But it does allow what our Queen used to talk about on Christmas Day every year. She would give a broadcast, and she would say not only to the English nation, but to the nations of the Commonwealth, she would say, I find myself holding the Christ light of the child who was born in Bethlehem, who is the one that, I've pledged my faith to. But at the same time, I'm walking beside so many of my peoples across the world and in this nation who show me glimmerings of their own pilgrimage and their own light. And that cannot be anything but helpful to my own journey. And that seemed to me to be the epitome of what should be being said on Christmas Day. And she was the one who always said it.
Yes, that's beautifully said. And I want to point out that I am not going to go down the rabbit hole of asking about the royal family, which is an American love here in the States. I'm not doing it. It's taking great strength on my part. Since you brought up religious diversity and the chills of these holy moments, I'd like to talk a little bit about how here in America we struggle with that. And religious extremism happens in every religion, and Christianity is not immune from extremism. So here in the States, we've been experiencing Christian extremism in some laws that are being passed that restrict access to basic human rights for large swaths of human beings, all done in the name of the Bible. And there's a huge effort with a lot of money in order to do that. How, as someone who's not in America experiencing that, but has seen and experienced a lot of extremism, what would be your feedback or response to how we navigate that with hope?
Well, I think that when one suddenly realizes that extremism does shut the door between, and that's the best image I can think of with extremism. And a lot of the extremism is done to build up the security of people who are shutting the door.
Amen.
And yet, if we feel the freedom that now I'm talking in Christian terms now, that Christ is giving us as people of body, mind, and spirit, and Christ in his humanity and his thinking and teaching, and also his absolutely giving of his own life at that point is the absolute icon of what it means to be totally open in love to those who begin to hate you most. Then the Bible is talking about that all the time. And if one is going to rest on certain texts in the Bible, then I don't want to say it's a hiding to nothing, but it means you could find sentences in the scripture which, if you said this is the only way to receive this, would make nonsense of other texts in the Bible too. So if one goes to the heartland of Jesus's I am statements, their embracing of the whole world and asking the friends of Jesus to abide in him as he abides in them. And you'd have to be very careful about Jesus with the Syrophoenician woman, for example, who just broke down barriers because he saw her need, or the Roman centurion, and he didn't say, what's your faith, and all the time too he was following the line of Judaism that his parents had taught him, and going to synagogue, as St. Luke says, as his custom was, and yet finding massive hostility. and then needing still to show that those doors were open. I suppose Luke's story of Jesus on the cross, when he is saying to the penitent thief, today you will be with me in paradise. There's nothing about what are your credentials.
Exactly.
It's actually the fact that certain ways of being open the doors of heaven and others close them.
I love that.
And heaven itself is, a short code for our ability to open out into eternal dimensions in so many ways. And we, as a little planet in the middle of things, Fletcher and I went to infinity in the NASA. Okay, this is in Houston. You can go into something which looks like a great aircraft hangar, and inside they put on you, yes, a virtual reality headset. And you find yourself walking around in space, around the space station, and below you is the Earth, looking oh so beautiful with all its blue seas and the skies there. But out in space is infinity with the millions and millions and uncountable numbers of stars and all of that. It's that dimension which Jesus then takes down to a pinpoint, which is what we would be, not even a pinpoint, and then opens up the dimension. And we were wandering around, and our senses were completely different because they'd given you earphones and things to see through. But at the same time, you were feeling a bit nervous because it looked as though you'd step off the space station and straight down into space forever and ever. And then you were actually perfectly safe. But the dimension of that for an hour really did challenge your humanity, because all that you knew in terms of relating became very, very different. And I was glad of that. This was on my birthday, I think, wasn't it? So I'd reached 77 years, and then at that point was looking into a space that was just so challenging that all our thinking could be seen to be nothing. But Jesus gave the feeling then in his teaching, as so many prophets do, and men and women throughout the centuries do, in terms of opening up things to the, should we call it, the divine dimension within humanity. And we can explore this forever, but the one thing that closes it down is if someone says, this is the truth, the absolute truth, there's no questioning it, and it means this, then I'm very doubtful. At all times. And so
I agree. And I think that is a beautiful message, especially here in Oklahoma, where our legislature currently is trying to pass laws that is essentially going to force Christianity onto children in the state. So the notion that slamming of the door is just a perfect, beautiful image.
It's I mean, far be it from for me or Fletcher to speak about political situations in other lands. We're both facing an election very soon. Ours is on July the 4th now. We've only learned that since coming here. And yours is in November the 4th. And so ours is on your Independence Day, I think. So I'm not going to comment on political things.
You're all good.
It's just impossible for someone outside to do that. But there are certain things, and then to go back to the Queen's message, there are things we can learn from one another if we're walking side by side and have open ears and open eyes. And that's really the most important thing you would say to people. And it's fairly poignant that in St Mark's Gospel, which is the earliest of the text, well, there's certainly earlier sources in John, but St Mark's the earliest gospel that goes all the way through, and it's short and it's really quickly over if you read the whole thing through. But he spends time on people and detail that others don't. And there's that moment when Jesus is going through Jericho on the way to Jerusalem, where his crucifixion will take place. And he's been trying so hard to get his friends to understand what the message is and what true glory is and all of that. And there's Bartimaeus sitting at the gate, shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me." And Mark is the only one who gives his name. And then he is called forward. And Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "That I might receive my sight." And Jesus could have said, and he implies that, "You've already got more sight than most of the ones I've been trying to explain this to." But he says to him then, "Receive your sight. Your faith has made you well." And this is the loveliest sentence of all in St. Mark's. So he then followed Jesus on the way. And that was what Christians were first called, as we know from the Acts of the Apostles, followers of the way with a capital W. And that this blind man, who had been seeing more than others anyway, could then follow Jesus on the way, is to me one of those little cameos which it takes a long time to see. The other blind man, of course, is the one that Jesus heals in St. John's Gospel, who says to the authorities, "I can't." They say, "What do you say about this man, this Jesus?" He says, "I can only say one thing. I was blind and now I see."
Right.
And these things are dimensions of realizations which come to you at different times in life. And sacred scriptures and sacred books and all kinds of teaching and learning suddenly jump out at you and make sense in a completely different way. So
the Gospel of Mark is my favorite, mostly because there's such an emphasis on trying to get disciples to understand. And Jesus is really trying to show this way that is counterintuitive to the culture around them. It's very fascinating, and it's something that we continue to journey with thousands of years later.
James and John going forward and saying, "Can we be with you in your glory?" One on the other. Jesus says, "You've no idea what you're talking about."
That's right.
So
That's right.
Here is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and he calls the child and puts them there, because in that innocent child there's more awareness of the spiritual dimension than any of the disciples he's wrestling with at the moment.
That's right.
So all of those things, I think, you bear reading over and over and over again, and placing yourself nearby as those things are read.
The Garden Congregation.
Okay.
I have watched a few episodes, and when we came into what this global pandemic was going to be, it caused all of us to shift clearly. And you had a beautiful shift into taking your ministry into this stunning setting with the birds chirping. And you would comment, you would take a pause and you would comment on the beautiful birds, and you would comment on your cat Leo, which I have fallen in love with from the videos, and what Leo was doing in response. And I would love to hear about the idea of that, but also what was the pandemic like for you personally in your ministry?
Right. So we came to this point in ministry where suddenly the whole world was afraid, because it was something that we didn't know how to combat. There were no vaccinations, and we live in an age when a quick fix is ready for any kind of danger in terms of medicine. And suddenly everyone was scared. So the whole world then went into lockdown.
Right.
And that was the only way we could think of as combating this. And it happened to be the most beautiful English spring we've had for a very long time. And on, I think, March the 25th in 2020, the Archbishop called for all churches to be closed, which was an order for the parish clergy. But cathedrals have an independence from that as being royal foundations. But it felt loyal to stay with my brothers and sisters, the clergy, who were going to be locked out of their buildings. But it was Fletcher who then said, but look, we've always believed that the cathedral isn't just that building in the middle.
Right.
It's everything within the circuit of these walls. And the deanery garden, which was 2.6 acres or so, and different things. And Fletcher had created of that the most wonderful garden space over the years. And there were different sections of it. We didn't know that this was going to last long. It lasted, in fact, 26 months every day. And we started then, and you said, go into the garden, say morning prayer. I will bring a camera, and you've not really taken up a camera before, but I'll bring a camera, and maybe one or two of our congregation, our own congregation, might be helped.
Yes.
And so if you look at the early ones, because they're still all online,
yes,
you look at something which was very sort of nervy and stiff, and not much movement and anything else. But people even then began to tune in because they were wanting some kind of rhythmic spiritual sustenance.
Yep.
And we simply read Anglican Church of England morning prayer, and then began to comment around because it seemed the natural thing to do.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cats. That happened a little bit later on. And that meant that suddenly I think it was a compline that we were doing in the orchard when the bluebells were out. And Leo, the one you're talking about, we had 4 cats at that time, and Leo jumped onto the table, and I looked at Fletcher and said, shall we stop, by a gesture? And he said, no, carry on. And we got to Our Father who art in heaven. And when I came to Amen, the cat yawned. and somehow, the people watching needed that humor.
Of course.
But that wasn't what brought them in huge numbers. It was the same cat who I was wearing a black Sarum cassock, which opens at the front in a flap. And he suddenly ran in and disappeared. He came from nowhere and ran in and disappeared. And this went out to billions across the world. It was extraordinary how that, and it's done the rounds several times. And so it was in New York Times, and it was in all over CNN. It went through even China. And in Korea, it was made into a TikTok song, which was even used in nightclubs in Korea. And he would run into the cassock. And then you'd find yourself in a dark, slightly lit dance hall with all cats dancing around. And that's meant to be where he'd gone. Now, the interesting thing about that is that was a stepping stone to people embracing, staying on and embracing a regularity of being with us. So we had, and I've said this so many times, that a priest from I think it was from Canada, who got in touch and said, I tuned in for cat and stayed for catechism. And from that moment onwards, he was with us all the way through. But the essence of it, and you actually set this, so you ought to say it really. In case he's not keen to say anything, we had as a sort of an axiom of what we were doing, that it would be which way around does it go? Unashamedly Christian, but unapologetically open. Yeah.
Ooh, I like that.
So
unashamedly Christian,
but unapologetically inclusive, open to all. Yes.
Beautiful.
And that's what we tried to do. So we never ceased to use the ordinary morning prayer, but that was just a vehicle for thinking about all kinds of things that were going on in the world. Before we'd finished, we were deep into the war with Ukraine and Russia. So we were in a dangerous world, in another way, from the pandemic. And at the same time, talking about people from the past who had been instrumental in creating a unity of humanity in some way, even in small ways. And we would look at dates. That was your idea too, just to look at dates and anniversaries. And then you would say, oh, this was the date that so-and-so was born, and they could be musicians. And we made a great deal of the fact of human creativity. Canterbury was for 1,000 years a Benedictine monastery before the Reformation. And the rule of St. Benedict still governed the life of the cathedral, which was seeing a human being as an integral fusion of body, mind, and spirit, lived out best in community, a community given totally to hospitality. And that was the essence of the Benedictine rule. And we tried to keep that balance with everything we were doing, but creativity in the middle of that, whether it was mental, spiritual, or physical, was really where you were closest to the Creator. And my learning about this in my own life is that there are certain gifts that you discover in yourself that you never knew you had, but that they can be opened by an incident, like the two incidents that I described with the Imam and the Sikhs. But at the same time, it needs the encouraging voice of someone to say, you're rather good at that. And you say, what, me? Then you say, yes, that is terrific. That this is why don't you develop that? And the word encouragement is another Benedictine word. So Benedict was really keen that those who were good at something encourage the ones who weren't, because the ones who weren't will be good at something else.
That's right.
And humanity as a whole is a unity in that way. So all those things came into garden congregation exercises, and we were helped so much by people sending us messages in. But at first, we were sort of shy about ourselves. And so it was, because when you're in a pulpit 6 foot above contradiction, but you've no idea when you're getting tens of thousands out there in the world, and then hundreds of thousands later on, you've no idea who's listening and what the comeback's going to be. But we needn't have been afraid, really. And you kept saying, the more you're yourself, the more you admit to failings and all of that, and show yourself as you are, the better it will be. The people will react. And so it was. And it was very rare to get hostile comments. There was much gratitude that this was being done. Yeah. And now there's a deal of disappointment to deal with as well, because they're expecting that it could continue. And it's impossible to do that every day. So we're now doing one about once a week. And it's quite a lot of editing for Fletcher as we're traveling. So, absolutely. But when they go on, as I said, the one with Leo just the Saturday before last, they still get, and the pandemic's long over. Right. But there's a sense of, when they thought themselves of this title, the Garden Congregation, and it tended to give people a worldwide family. And all so different, but people would write in and say, I used to go to synagogue, and I found that what was being said to me there was not letting me be myself or something, but now I've tuned into this. And it was never our intention just for everyone to be online in their worship, because I think all things that go forward need to be physical in human terms. And so it wasn't a substitute for gathering together. And we would say to people, find the community that suits you, and then take strength from what we're doing, of course, but use your own creativity. And goodness, they did. When we said it Lent, take a little sentence from what you've heard today, or maybe another part of your life, and just write it against the date. Don't write too much, because you'll stop doing it. And just go through and write a Lent book, and maybe illustrate it if you want. And we got loads of these sent in to us, and if they were really complicated, we would send them back saying, we've looked at this and it's wonderful, but this is part of your story, so you need to take it there. But trying to find the musicians who would give us copyright to put on songs and things in was a difficulty as well. Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, it was, YouTube's very fierce about copyrights. And there was one day when we were actually showing a carol being sung by our girls' choir. So it was our girls' choir. The carol I had written both the words and the music to. And then it fell from copyright, and I said, "Well, it's my copyright, but it was they're just so strict about
Oh,
copyrights." But
wow.
you had to fight that quite often on the way through.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, sorry, I'm talking too much. But
No, you are not.
Let's open it out a bit.
And you write hymns.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I always have.
I found it easy to write verses early on, and it was the Bishop of Salisbury in about 1978 or something who said to me, "We're having a great festival. I want a hymn for it, and so could you write me one?" I said, "Well, I've never written one of these," but he said, "Well, no, here's the time encouragement, of a gift that wasn't there." So from then on, yes, that, and actually the hymn that he asked for is the one, Joseph, that you have chosen. And to sing in St Augustine's, this was unbeknown to me.
Perfect.
This is "The Kingdom is Upon You." I'll come back to the inspiration of that in a moment. But I was going to say that Scott, your director of music, has now written a new tune for it, and he said, "Would you like to name the tune?" We were going to call it Willis. He said, I said, "No, hymn tunes generally get place names."
Yes.
And so we've decided to offer the name Wansome, because that was the channel that Augustine used to come into England. And it seemed right for the Church of St Augustine that this sort of entry into Kent to bring the gospel would be the name of that tune. So we're looking forward to singing the new tune on
That's incredible.
On Sunday morning. Yeah,
that's very incredible. Goodness. Okay. I have to say that we as an organization are starting a new program series called Tending the Garden.
Oh, right. Gosh.
We are.
Yeah.
And that is happening with our amazing staff member, Kat Romero. She's sitting back there. And it's going to focus on ecological theology.
Sure.
And I would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts around the theology of the environment and caring for our environment.
Okay. We had a television interviewer come to make a little film in the greenhouse with not Leo, but Tiger, who was the tabby cat who used to put his paw in the milk, but had an amputation, if you remember, because his front paw was cancerous. And so during the pandemic, this happened. And the world all sent get well soon cards and all the rest of it. But at the end of this television exercise, this young reporter, whom we've met since, haven't we, in a church, which we'll talk about in a bit, but he, walking around the garden, said, "Isn't this a bit odd? Because Jesus didn't talk about flowers and what much in the open air." And I thought, this is very odd. Both of us were gobsmacked, weren't we, by this? That because when you think of Jesus, he's really rarely inside.
Right.
He's outside, and he quotes the Psalms, which are full of the glory of the earth and the seasons and everything else. And at the same time, too, he'll use the illustrations of the flowers of the field or the birds of the air, all of those things. And we actually said to him, "Well, where do you think of Jesus being?" And gradually he turned around and he said, "Oh, yes, I suppose that's true." But there's an awful lot of ignorance about that. And I think Jesus' care of things there, and for his time as well, is phenomenal. But we know that he would go to quiet spaces because it was so necessary to recharge the batteries. And you find in St Mark's Gospel that Peter goes out to find him early in the morning and says, "Everyone is looking for you." But then on the lakeside too, and in the boat with the storms and everything that the planet can show itself doing. And now we know, we have the knowledge to know what damage the human race can do to this beautiful planet that we were looking at from the space station, so to speak, in this virtual reality. And the extraordinary thing is that that lovely blue orb with its white clouds, which we're so used to seeing as our Earth, until rockets went up, no one had ever seen that before.
Yeah.
So that the beauty of all of that is crucial. But I think that responsibility for the planet has become a holy charge.
Agreed.
And that would be so from the prophets in the Old Testament, from the priestly writer of Genesis chapter 1, and the other writer from Genesis chapter 2, all of these people who put that in. There is a valuing of the planet, the wisdom literature, the book of Job,
yes,
and also the poetry of Solomon and the Song of Songs, and all of those are speaking about this beautiful planet which we have a responsibility to hand on unsullied.
yes.
But how we achieve that, because we've done so much damage already, that it has to be a constant, sharp message that this is a holy duty. And then in planting a garden, it becomes a little planet in miniature to remind you how easily things die if they're not tended carefully, how creatures need the right environment, and their numbers are shrinking at a terrible pace, so that there are beautiful creatures who our successors will never see because they've become extinct.
Right.
And so all of that is so large a subject, but I would say it is a holy subject. And right in the middle of the it should be right in the middle of the agenda of every faith. And I've no doubt about that.
Yes.
You would actually underline that a million times, wouldn't you?
Yes. A holy duty. That's beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
And this little garden of 2.5 acres became a microcosm of the planet and its seasons, as being pointed out to us by Noel, that here are the 4 seasons. And we went through those 26 months. We went through the seasons, all of them, twice. And then, there were snowy days when in Sydney they were baking hot.
Yes.
In the old days, even the breviaries, the daily worship books of the church were set out in spring, summer, autumn, winter volumes. And I loved that. I loved doing hymn books where you start with morning and then go through seasons. But it was impossible to stay with that the minute the Southern Hemisphere became part of this too, because you had Easter Day, and not in spring at all, but in autumn in the Southern Hemisphere. All of those things.
How interesting.
Yeah, but the diversity of the seasons and the beauty of all of that, I think musicians have captured, poets have captured, Shakespeare's sonnets have captured, all of those things. But it is a holy duty to look at that and be really concerned about it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Since we are a smaller group, we have about 10 more minutes. So if anyone has a question they'd like to ask the dean, I'd ask you to just maybe raise your hand. I will re-communicate it into the mic for those tuning in online. But are there any questions you all have?
Please be brave.
Be brave. If not, I'll keep talking. Anybody? Yes.
Please. I think we look at what's happening to the situation around them, and there's the climate change is affecting the world in a great way. I would say that for the young people of the world, there are huge dangers of war and climate change, and also the dangers of mass migration from dangerous places. It's always been the case, but we've so populated the planet that the mass migrations are beginning to be just unmanageable to so many smaller nations. If people feel, oh, we'll all go there because it's a better life there, then all of that is a total human problem, and it's going to take centuries to put that right. But we have to start somewhere, and so it has to be part of the message when you get to any place. Sort of look around you. How was it that then? Tell your story about the glacier. Go on.
Yay, Fletcher.
No, I'm gonna
Come over here so the camera can see you. This is Fletcher, everybody.
Hi. Hello. Hi. No, the example that we came across last summer was actually in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, in a really beautiful place called Bielsa. And in this place, we were staying in the middle of the national park, and the whole place was like the Garden of Eden. It was just extraordinary. It was in a natural circus of the mountains, and so two valleys were converging. And where the two mountains met, you had even in the middle of August, waterfalls cascading down. And so it was just the sound of water and bird song. You walked up onto the plateau. There were even bears in the woodlands there, which is very rare. I know it's very common in this country, but it was very rare in Europe.
Yeah.
And butterflies and just the pure diversity of nature. Later in the day, we went down and we were talking to a lovely local lady, and she was about my age, so sort of mid-40s. And she said, even when I was a girl, so it's not that long ago, she said the glacier that feeds all of that life and actually feeds into the waterfalls, and then the waterfalls turn into the rivers and streams that water everything around there, was twice the size. And so she said that it's possible that within 20, 30 years, that glacier will completely disappear and all life ceases. And that was a really palpable lesson as to how fragile our environments and ecosystems are.
Yes.
And so that will never be reborn, and not for potentially millions of years, perhaps.
Right.
But actually, to my mind, we haven't created climate change, but the speed at which we are changing the planet is intensifying things so that nature can't evolve at the same rate. And so, climate change has always happened, and it's gone one way and it's gone the other. But the impact that our species is having for the last 150, 200 years especially, has caused us really to endanger the fragile balance of creation.
Wow. And how interesting to think about how we're influencing that balance. And then you set it alongside it being a holy duty to bring it back into balance for the sake of all that's around us.
Well, to my mind,
Yes.
I think that that's always been the case in one way or another. And we have a great friend, Jamie Corrith, who's an artist, and he, when he was studying anthropology at university, would go to different remote parts of especially Africa a bit, but also in Asia as well. He found that he would study indigenous tribes and sort of ancient peoples and look at their practices. And they found, I think it was in Madagascar, that they found that there was a tradition of certain species of plants or animals that were revered as being holy to those people in their own indigenous religions. And because of the religious connections that they had, because the same with First Peoples in this country, the understanding that they had of the balance of nature and the way that you have to live in balance with nature, not
Yes.
against it.
Yes.
That meant that there were times when you had self-imposed frugality, because actually the risk is that you then destroy that balance and you don't have anything in the future. So it's just tending the garden on a planetary
Yes.
scale.
Yes.
And actually having a respect or a religious reverence, depending upon one's semantics, for the things around us. So I think that the idea of it being a holy vocation is not new. I mean, it's existed for thousands of years, long before our peoples developed.
Absolutely.
But it's the way that we actually recognize that and hardwire that into what we do every week together as a community or individually in our own backyards.
Mm.
But I think also the potential reach for the institutions of faith and church. It's still, although church numbers have dwindled across all religions globally, it's not
Yes.
just the Episcopal Church, and it's not just Christianity, but we still, as a network, have one of the most extensive and far-reaching abilities of any other kind of organization on the planet, through charities, through food agencies, through social justice agencies. And so if we can increase the ante on environmental factors and environmental awareness, so that that message is actually brought to each one of those points of contact on a planetary scale. That has to be a good thing.
I agree completely. Thank you, Fletcher. Thank you.
Thanks. You remember, Fletcher, when we were sitting with Ban Ki-moon in the United Nations when he was the Secretary General, and I was saying that there's something which had come from Jamie Corris as well, that holy sites tended to protect. And he roundly said, but holy sites and holy people have very often been the very first cause of violence between people.
Right.
And it was a very difficult argument to counter, because one knew that we don't have clean hands in terms of how we treat one another.
Right.
And so, far from being peaceful places, very often holy sites can be fermenting the kind of discord which comes. And so one then has to go back to the image of, again, Queen Elizabeth II saying, walking together and bearing your own light.
Yes.
is something that actually helps all. But
Yes.
we're not saying this is an easy thing at all. And when we sat looking at this Secretary General of the United Nations, I really didn't envy his job that was going on in his office there. And we were
No.
glad of the conversation, because it sort of gave balance to what we were saying as well.
In closing,
Yeah.
I would love to just offer you an opportunity to close us with a parting thought.
Yes, okay. I think the parting thoughts are all about discovering in your own lives, and this will change as you get older or meet new people, new shoots of creativity which will help you not only realize what we've been talking about in your own life, but illustrate it to others in the most imaginative ways, because it's a holy duty on our part to share not only our creativity mentally and physically, but also, most difficult of all, that divine imaginative capacity which human beings have, which transcend our flesh and blood and reach out. And anything that can help another by something you say, a small story about your own life, all of those things, do pass it on, because the world has never been more in need of encouragement than it is now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I want to thank Oklahoma City University for having us. I want to thank Father Joseph Alsay for connecting us with the Dean. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to the OFN team for being flexible and rolling with it always. We do have information about us out on the table, and I want to wish you all a blessed day. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Would you mind taking a picture with me before
Of course, no,
everyone else
absolutely.
requests
surely,
one?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
let's do that.
No, I don't want to
Yes.
look as though we're still-
We will.